All right, we are live. It is Wednesday, the 31st of January, 2018. My name is Luke Thomas, and this is the Promotional Malpractice Live Chat here on MMAfighting.com. Thank you so much for joining me. I greatly appreciate it. We'll go for about 90 minutes today, give or take. We'll get to the latest and greatest in all of mixed martial arts and probably a few things beyond that. Let's see. We'll talk about Ronda Rousey to the WWE, I'm sure. All this champ versus champ controversy, UFC 223, UFC 226, UFC Belem is this weekend, right? So that should be kind of interesting as well. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on, and I'm happy to take your questions and comments about it. Best place to do that, of course, is going to be on MMAfighting.com, where this little window here is embedded. What else? Yeah. So let's see, working with a new internet signal, working with a new camera, working with a new computer. Hopefully this gives you a bit of a better signal. I don't know that it will, but I'll try. All right? All right. Let's have some coffee. Smile. All right. Let's get to it, shall we? We shall. Bump, bada, bump, bump. Okay. Darren Till. Hey, Luke, I've noticed since his win over Cerrone, the UFC are kind of banking on Darren Till to become the first true MMA star from Britain and become the UK's equivalent of McGregor. A lot of media members and fans in the States seem to feel this way too. However, I think Till continuing to represent both Brazil and UK, Liverpool, will mean he won't. Till reminds me of Lennox Lewis, who fought in the Olympics for Canada and fought professionally as a Brit. The fact he didn't have one clear loyalty meant the British public never really took to him in the same way as we have for Joshua, despite perhaps being the better fighter. McGregor is unabashed about his loyalty to Ireland. He's exclusively Irish, and they love him for that. Till is a long way from that in the UK. Has there ever been a fighter who has gained mass popularity representing two nations in the way Till does? Then someone asks, and this turned green, on what planet is Michael Bisping not a true MMA star? He's most likely a future Hall of Famer. Someone also says Till has a massive following in a vocal part of the UK, Liverpool. Someone says two nations identity off the top of my head. Kane, USA, Mexico, and Ngannou, France, Cameroon. I wouldn't say that the French really take to him. Habib, Russia, Dagestan. That's the same thing. Someone has its own identity history, right? But it's part of Russia. It's not a different nation. I don't know if I'm so. Maybe you could maybe say Oscar De La Hoya, and to an extent, right? He crossed boundaries and was able to, effectively represent two groups, even separated by language. I don't know that Till. I don't know. Look, this is a hard one for me to answer, because I don't really know how Till is viewed within the British media or British MMA media. I mean, I realize he's viewed favorably. I don't mean that, but I mean, like, to what extent is he really a star? To what extent is he really at the top of everyone's minds every single day? I don't know the answer to that. At least not a very effective one. So it's very hard for me to give you a clear sense about how he'll be viewed in terms of a representative. I do think that it's a bit unfair to Michael Bisping to say that, if Till comes along and he's the first true star, or he's a star, that he would be the first true one. I mean, there's a couple of things that work against that argument. Number one, Michael Bisping, I don't think it's true that Michael Bisping is viewed in the UK the same way as McGregor is viewed in Ireland, in part because obviously Ireland is smaller, and McGregor came around at a bit of a different time in the sport, right? So Bisping's ascent coincided with MMA's rise, which means it wasn't quite this established thing that it was when McGregor came along. And so, pardon me, I had an allergy attack last night. My nose is running like crazy. In any case, so it's not fair to say that Michael Bisping is not a true. I mean, look, he can go to the UK and do well. He was a champion. He's more like a star/pioneer versus like the most celebrated figure. So I do think there's room for someone to exceed the level of popularity he amassed in the UK. But I don't want to like exclude him from the conversation. But if your point is somebody who really becomes like an Anthony Joshua type, which I think quite fairly you could say for all of Michael Bisping's many successes, he is not that in MMA. Good Lord. Okay, fair enough. Whether Till is that guy, I don't know, but I don't think that representing Brazil would really hold him back. He appears to be the genuine article from the outside looking in. This is more an issue for what people from Liverpool and the rest of the UK might have to say. It's not really a thing I can weigh in on. Even if I could try to convince them to go one way or the other, they wouldn't listen, nor should they. This is something about whether the people themselves naturally see themselves in Till, whether Till reflects that back to them, whether he has enough success to make them want to see themselves in him. There's a lot of different complicating factors. Yes, McGregor was unabashedly Irish, but he also did a lot of things to make, not to make the Irish like him exactly, but to be like, he wanted, representing them was something that mattered to him. And because he was good at it, both through his success in the cage and the way in which he was a vocal advocate for it, it naturally all kind of worked out. Till has to do some of that with not merely what he does in the cage, but outside of it as well. And so I think if you're asking me, can he be a Joshua type? I would never put a limit on him. That seems a little bit maybe out of reach. To me, the biggest thing, and I mentioned this on Twitter yesterday, was, again, the fans in Liverpool and the rest of the UK are going to have to decide who's what over there, and no American is going to tell them one thing or the other. But the one thing I will say that I'm a little bit concerned about with Darren Till is, like, when did he beat Don Cerrone? When was that? October? When was that? As I type in Darren Till here in Google. He's 25 years old, which is great. He beat Don Cerrone back in October. October 21st. November, December, January. We're now 3 months out. And we still don't have a fight booked for him, even for March. So here's my thing about that. He needs to strike while the iron is hot, because the iron is hot. I am not telling you the iron is not hot, but if you want to really get out there and become something special, yes, McGregor was derailed eventually by that ACL tear after the Holloway fight. But let's go and look at McGregor's UFC campaign when it first got going. I mean, you can ask a question about whether or not Till has the natural ingredients to be something, but part of that, you actually have to get out there and do it. And if you're inactive, that affects it. So he made his debut against Marcus Brimage in April. All right. So then May, June, July, he fought in August, 4 months later. Right. Then that was against Max Holloway. He had the injury. He came in less than a year later against Diego Brandao. That was in Ireland. So then after that, in July, so right after July, August, September, then he beats Dustin Poirier. Then after September, October, November, December, January, 4 months later, he fights. Then 6 months later, not even, he fights again. And then after that, another 6 months. Like, he was constantly active. So I'm not telling you that 5 months off is the end of the world, or even 6 months. What I am saying is something needs to happen here pretty soon. Like, let's book him in a fight. Let's get things going. He might have some injuries that he's dealing with here, or whatever sort of training challenge. I'm just pointing out, look at what McGregor did. He did have the ACL tear, and that didn't ruin things. But he came back from the ACL tear in less than a year, which is really impressive, number one. And number two, when he didn't have the ACL tear, every it looks like 4 to 6 months he was in there ready to go, which means the fights were booked very quickly for him in quick succession. My one criticism of what's happening with Till, whether it's his fault or the UFC's fault or nobody's fault, it's just the way things are working out. If there's a way to get him in there relatively quickly, build on that momentum. Build. That's really what he needs. He needs an opportunity to get in there and make things happen. Because you can say he's got all the ingredients. He's got that Scouse accent. People love him. They identify with him. He identifies with them as a leader of people, as a representative, all those things. He can have all those ingredients, but if you're not active enough, you can't really build something. It's really how you have to think of it. You have to stack things on top of each other. And if you're not doing that, it's not really going to work. So to me, that's the biggest question here. He probably has enough to be a national icon. Is he active enough to make it happen? That's what I'm worried about. All right, DC versus Stipe. Why tough? The Ultimate Fighter. A lot has been said about the matchup itself, but what about the decision to put them as coaches in the next tough season? Is it all to give Stipe the push he has been asking for? To be a little positive, I think tough is a context that can make Stipe shine a little, but still, ... it's tough. All right. Let's ask about that, or let's talk about that, because then there's a follow-up question related to DC's weight management, apparently, which I'll talk about in just a moment. I think that it's a lot of things. Number one, they needed what's one thing that boxing really does well? Really does well. That they seem to cater it more to their Latino audience than anything else. But for example, perfect example. What's the next big, like really big boxing fight that's coming up on your calendar? You can set your calendar to it because you know it's going to be on Cinco de Mayo. Of course, the rematch between Canelo and Triple G. They're really, really good about just having dates on the calendar that they all kind of rally behind. And it just so happens that this year, Cinco de Mayo, which, by the way, is not really a Mexican holiday. I mean, it sort of is, but it's really a Mexican-American holiday, which is fine. It's a different story. But nevertheless, Cinco de Mayo is going to be on a Saturday this year. Now, that's more than just a date on a calendar. That has some cultural relevance as well. A little bit tenuous, but still some cultural relevance. And so as a consequence, they're always really good about finding those dates. Mexican Independence Day, you know, Cotto at MSG was really good about fighting, you know, close to Puerto Rican, like when they had the Puerto Rican Pride parades, whatever, on the Puerto Rican Pride Day, he would be really good about having fights at MSG, you know, in close proximity. They're just really good about marrying those things. Now, International Fight Week is just sort of a date in July that has no larger cultural relevance. And I still think, man, if they could have pulled off Conor McGregor fighting at St. Patrick's Day in New York City, are you kidding me? That would have been, I mean, monumental. The UFC, I mean, I'll give them credit. If they tried to do that and they just couldn't, then they just couldn't. But that would have been huge. More of that is what we need. But in any case, at least MMA fans are starting to get the idea that July, International Fight Week, it's just big for MMA. Obviously, my colleague Ariel Helwani told us after the last November New York show that these November New York shows are a thing they want to keep doing, which I like. I like some measure of big event consistency. I wish they would tie it to things that have deeper cultural roots to play off that, but neither here nor there. So if you know you have to do that and you're booking out the calendar and you can pencil that one in, why not? Plus, you owe inventory to Fox Sports 1. You owe them a season of The Ultimate Fighter. Someone has to do it, right? You got to pick two coaches. What better two coaches than this one? If you're going to have that there, they just got done. They're going to have that big fight they want. It satisfies a lot of requirements. They don't have to go out and do it a bunch of, I mean, they have to do The Ultimate Fighter itself, but they don't have to, you know, take a nonsense fight they don't want to take in between. Again, you satisfy the conditions for Fox Sports 1. And really, you asked a question here about Stipe Miocic. Again, I don't really understand what Stipe wants, to be honest, because he has been rather explicit that celebrity is not something he's interested in. And I understand he probably thinks of celebrity as something different than being promoted, but they're really not all that different. They're kind of related. They're heavily related. But, you know, look, he's asking to be promoted. Whatever else he said in the past, forget all that. Now he's got this Modelo Especial sponsorship. He's going to be on The Ultimate Fighter. I think you're right. Here's the guy who, you know, in an interview here or an interview there in this phony setting where a microphone is shoved in your face, you know, he may not come across as himself. But when he just sort of gets used to cameras being there, to the extent that he will, maybe he'll have a different perspective. And maybe over time, people will say, hey, this is the Stipe Miocic we've been looking to see. In the end, I think they're putting him on a franchise that doesn't do the kind of thing that it used to. So I would have some modest expectations about that. But if you're Stipe Miocic and you're saying, I want to be in big fights on big cards, on big dates and big occasions, and I've not been promoted properly, the UFC saying, okay, we're going to put you on International Fight Week. You're going to headline. It's going to be champ versus champ. It's going to be preceded by the Ultimate Fighter, which means you're going to be on TV for week after week after week after week after week. Leading up to all of that, what can you complain about then? It kind of silences your criticisms at that point. So I don't see how I don't see what the downside is for the UFC other than does it tie them up? But the whole point about making this fight ostensibly is that there's no one else to really have them fight now. So might as well just tie them up with the Ultimate Fighter. And the guys who want to be active because they have a reason to be active, let them go be active. Now, you're asking follow-up DC's weight management. DC moves back up to heavyweight to fight Stipe for the title. What kind of approach do you think DC will have weight-wise? He probably walks around at about 230. Do you think he should just fight at his walk-around weight, or should he put some extra muscle? I do not think he should put on extra muscle. Now, certainly this would be a question for somebody who's got way more credentials about, you know, training and prepping athletes for elite competition. But if you're asking me, remember what he said about John Jones with all the powerlifting? He's messing with the secret sauce. I think he'd be doing the same as well. The only question is, walk around weight, I don't know. The better question would be, it's either his walk around weight or something close to it. At what weight does he have, sort of maximum cardiovascular output, VO2 max, the whole nine? At what point do we reach that? So that may be walk around weight. It may be slightly below. It may be slightly above, somewhere around there. But I mean, these details kind of matter. I wouldn't really leave it up to chance. But that's a question for, guys who work in a laboratory and guys who have years of experience training athletes and understanding peak conditioning and how to make them. Because the other part is like, how's he going to eat? He still needs to eat clean, right? You still have to put the right kind of nutrients in your body. Yes, you can probably have a higher caloric threshold, but not a higher caloric threshold with Starburst or, pick something, I don't know, burgers or whatever. There probably is some degree of relaxation of standards, but you still have to get all the macronutrients you need, all the micronutrients you need, and you still have to have those things help you deliver maximum performance. So to me, those are the kind of questions, if I was him, that I'd be looking at. I would still hire a nutritionist. That nutritionist is going to have a lot more latitude to work, but I wouldn't just say, well, what is it when I normally train and I normally walk around, what weight am I at? And I feel really comfortable there. I don't know that feeling comfortable is exactly where you want to go, but I don't know that that's not the way in which you would measure this. It would be, what is best for what kind of body type do I have? What realistically do I need? What kind of style do I need to beat Stipe Miocic? I think a hard pressure style is really going to be the way you beat Stipe Miocic. I think he doesn't take rounds off, but I think he likes to slow things down and pick his shots. Right? He likes to be a sniper a little bit. I think staying in his face, making him work, is the kind of thing he's going to need to do. So what does that mean? What kind of body does he need to have to do that? What kind of diet does he need to have to facilitate that kind of not merely fighting style, but that training load that comes before the fight? All those things are going to have to be weighed. And so, you need somebody like a Lane Norton or a God, who would be really good at that? I don't know. Somebody. I mean, Lane Norton wouldn't be necessarily great for MMA purposes, but somebody who has this kind of, he'd be really good for that. Somebody like a Mike Israetel. I've talked about Dr. Mike Israetel a bunch. I think he'd be really fantastic for something like that. Plus, he's a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. By the way, Dr. Mike Israetel recommended somebody, apparently the donk, who works at. Hold on. Mike Israetel said Bo Sandoval. Bo Sandoval is the head trainer at the Performance Institute. Apparently, this guy is a beast. I will admit ignorance about this. I do not know this gentleman. But Dr. Mike Israetel's opinion is something I take very seriously. And he was saying that Bo Sandoval is a beast, a complete beast. So, something to consider there. But I don't think adding on muscle is the right move for Cormier. I think he's naturally strong. And I don't know that he's going to be doing a lot of carrying of Stipe. I think it's more going to be a lot of movement, a lot of pressure, getting in his face, making him work. There's going to be some tie-ups eventually, but I think it's going to be a heavy movement workload. Jesus. UFC fight landscape. You've made your stance on champ versus champ fights very clear. I don't think I have, because I still get emails about it saying, hey, Luke, I disagree with X, when I didn't say X, but what can I do about that? You've also made your stance on oversaturation of fighters and cards in the UFC clear, I thought, but I don't know. In theory, it seems like these two problems would not occur at the same time. How could the UFC have so many fighters and yet not be able to create actual contenders? And how do these two problems exacerbate each other? Well, I would disagree. Well, I mean, I realize you're asking a question, so you're not stating something. You're saying rather it sort of stands to reason that if you have so many fighters, how could it be that you don't have enough of them at the same time, right? Sort of what you're asking. Enough in the critical places to fill all the roles, right? Because there's diminishing returns to adding to the roster. There's so many problems with adding to the roster. Now, look, let me just sort of make a declarative point up front to set the context here. The context is that they owe a certain amount of content even now through the rest of this year to Fox Sports 1, to Big Fox, to their pay-per-view MSOs. They are on the hook for amount of content. So whatever prescriptions for change that I'm about to offer, it's not even legally allowed to happen, at least except at the margins. They owe by contract certain amounts of content to a variety of different actors in the television and pay-per-view space. Okay, so that's just upfront. Number one. Number two. So how can it be the case that that's happening? I mean, this to me is very, very it's not very complicated, right? So I made this point, I think, on the last chat, right? So let's say there's 500 fighters on roster. There used to be 600. There might even be 600 still, but let's say there's 500, right? First of all, there's more fighters in the UFC than there are players in the NBA. That should just be a red flag automatically. But put that aside for just a moment. What does that mean? To me, you have to ask a question. As I mentioned before, you have a finite amount of dollars. You have a finite amount of creative inspiration. You have a finite amount of time in the day. You have a finite amount of ability to properly promote an event or a person or anything. And amidst all the other tasks and sort of bureaucratic churning that has to happen day over day over day, the amount of time you have to reasonably promote a fighter or a card or an event or whatever is limited. There's a real finite amount. And so when you think about that finite amount, how much of that can be done effectively? And the answer is probably not much. 50 fighters is probably how many in a calendar year you can effectively promote. Maybe it's a little higher than that, but probably not much. It could even be lower than that, depending what your definition of effective is. And so the point is, you're saying we have all these fighters, but you don't have enough of you've got a bunch at the premium end, but you've got all these other ones and all this duty to the point where even if you have a bunch of the right ones, are you really putting them in a position to get maximum eyeballs every single time that you stage an event? I would argue that you have not. Gregor Gillespie just had a win over Jordan Rinaldi. He has disappeared from the headlines already. I don't even know who saw it, and if they did, how memorable it was. This guy is a 4-time All-American, a national champion. He is 4-0 in the UFC and is buzz sawing people. And he is gone. That's because they don't have the effective ability to sit down on an event and really promote it, except when they have something really, really big, like a Stipe versus Ngannou. I don't know how to pronounce this guy's name. And they did that one really well. You saw I had very, very, very little complaint about how they did that fight. I thought they did that one exceptionally well. And Jones, Cormier too, they did that well as well. And they've done some other ones that were really well. It's not that they can't do it; it's that they just can't do it at scale, right? And people have made this point before. I've said before they need to cut at least 25 to 30% of that roster. I mean, where is Ryan Hall? How is he not fighting? What is happening here? If you can't make use of the guy, and maybe they're trying, but it shouldn't be this hard. Where are we going with this? Neither here nor there about Ryan Hall. My only point is there are a lot of ways that guys can get promoted. There's a lot of ways guys can develop themselves through the ranks. As I mentioned in my own video that I made about this, some of this is just a function of, at least in the light heavyweight and heavyweight division, is sort of cyclical, at least at light heavyweight, where the younger guys have not pushed through and pushed out the older guys. Some natural turnover has to happen. Some of that hasn't happened. That's not the UFC's fault. But at the same time, if you're having that problem, look at how many divisions they can't get guys to push through. Flyweight, light heavyweight, heavyweight, women's featherweight, that's even a division. And then bantamweight, they're just feeding to the featherweight queen. This is like 5.5 divisions or whatever, 4.5 divisions at this point, that you don't even know what's happening. I don't really understand that. There's a point where you can grow at scale and you can maintain quality. And there's a point where you grow at scale and all that quality disappears or begins to get degraded because it's just too hard to maintain it. And I think that's the point we're at now. The UFC would have to be like twice its size to properly manage the roster it has now, or at least 1.5 times the size. And then they don't have those resources. They have a finite workforce, a finite dollar amount, a finite amount of days in a calendar year, a finite amount of creative inspiration. It's all limited. So they can have this roster. A lot of this roster is at the bottom that doesn't do them any good for the premium side. At the premium side, they're having some cyclical challenges, which is not their fault. And then at the top, on top of that, they've expanded at such a rate and in such a scale that they can't probably maintain it. Like, you know, it sounds nice in theory for the UFC to have a flyweight division. I've said this before. I don't think it's coincidental that that Bellator doesn't have one, because I don't think they feel like they could maintain one, or that there would be a whole lot of consumer interest in one. And that's probably a smart call. It's probably a smart call. Now they do have a women's featherweight division, which is kind of interesting, but a bit of a different topic for a different debate. I would love to know what Scott Coker's opinion about that is. But you get the idea that this is the problem, is that at some point when you grow at scale, you don't grow the same way at scale. You might scale out and then the quality drops as a consequence of it. And I think that's what's happened. Someone says they have a matchmaking problem. Also, sometimes they kill young prospects, and other times they just don't know what to do with the 3-4 guys shining at the same time in the same division. Till, Colby, Usman, for instance. Well, part of that is, man, I cannot tell you how many fighters I talk to these days. Kamaru Usman, Anthony Smith, James Vick. All of them have told me this, how hard it is to get a fight with a guy who's ranked. How hard it is to get a there was a really interesting shouts to MMA Reddit. There was a really interesting post on MMA Reddit, and it listed the guys. You know what? Let me pull this up. Now, I don't want to besmirch my MMA media colleagues, and some of these guys I actually do know, but this is interesting. Here are the guys who decide the fate of matchmaking. Christopher Esping from burstback.se. I'm assuming that's some kind of Swedish site. Ken Pishna, who I know from MMA Weekly. Jeff Kane as well. Steve Jeffrey from CFMU 93.9 FM. I do not know who this gentleman is. He might be a great guy. I'm not judging. But Romain Cadeau from VladUsport.com. Rob D'Amelio from KHON Honolulu. That's actually a pretty big station. Andreas Hale from Fight News. Obviously, I know Andreas. Yeah, he's a bright guy. Eddie Papani from KIOZ San Diego. I do not know this gentleman. Steve Juan from Wrestling Observer. David Brown from Cherokee Scout. Brian Heminger from MMA Oddsbreaker. I know Brian. Ariel Schnurrer from Fight Network. Schnurrer. Bruno Masami from Gazzetta Esportiva. Grant Gordon, Burbank Leader, and Mike Johnston from Sportsnet. Now, these might be capable, interesting people, but this is who is deciding. And some of these guys I do know, but this is who is deciding the rankings. And then the rankings are determining, in the case of Vic, or he broke through but barely. In the case of Vic or Usman, and Usman broke through but barely. And, you know, you name it. Anthony Smith, for example, who has to take on Thiago Santos this weekend. These guys are all saying how hard it is to get, you know, to get a spot broken through. They can't get a fight with somebody ranked because those guys all circle the wagons and won't let them in. That's one problem that you're talking about here, where the UFC doesn't know what to do with. They can't compel those guys. They can't make them. So one, that's not really the UFC's fault if they're trying to make it and all these fighters are turning it down, other than maybe make it more worth their while financially. Maybe that's the solution, but I'm sure the UFC is trying. So they're maybe half right, half wrong in that sense. I think the other problem is, and we talked about, there's a lot of problems I think you can solve. I mean, maybe it's too late now, but at least in theory, it stands to reason that if you cut up the bottom 25, 30% of your roster, you're cutting not just a lot of fat away. Some of those guys are going to eventually make their way to the top of the organization. But here's the point. You want a bit of a robust developmental side to the sport. You need that, right? In the NBA, they have what, the D League or the G League or whatever is going on. And I can't even keep track anymore. But you also have, obviously, college basketball. This is some kind of a feeder system, right? And they help groom and recruit and mature and talent. And it has this process of getting talent ready. And you get excited about them on a certain level. Look at how good it's been for so many fighters. Eddie Alvarez, it was good for him. Justin Gaethje, it was good for him. Conor McGregor, it was good for him. Having a robust international scene where people can develop some kind of talent and the guys get big names and eventually move on. Look at how important that is. The UFC has to float Invicta, in part because I feel like there's not necessarily a lot of interest in women's MMA, at least not relative to the men's side. And in part because if they're going to have these divisions, then they have to have a feeder league that can help them develop this. But so I've made it before. It's almost like a nonprofit. But cutting out that, people have said, well, then the other organizations would get them. Good. It would help turn guys into, at least the ones who push through. It would, at least in some cases, help turn some of those guys into really, really prized acquisitions. That's a great way to make money in this business. Make a name somewhere else, have people say you can't fight, have people say you can fight, get signed as a big acquisition, and then if you're Justin Gaethje, you turn it on, and you know, he's had his ups, he's had his downs, but he's delivered on his promise and then some. And I feel like that's a key portion of the game that's not as big as it used to be. Cage Warrior's still around, and they do great work. And there's some other shows around, but it's not nearly as robust as it used to be. And I feel like the UFC also kind of expanded. Oh, let's have a flyweight division so another organization can't. Maybe let the other organization have it. Maybe it's good for them to have it, and really it's not good for you to have it. Just have the part of the sport that's the high end. Just my opinion. What are some of your favorite walkout songs you've heard? Least favorite? My personal favorite has to be Nick Diaz's for introducing me to Deftones. I kind of checked out on the Deftones after their second album, but I realized that's hypocrisy because the White Pony is supposed to be, the greatest thing since sliced bread. Favorite walkout songs you've heard? Obviously, forgive my Italian, but Conte Partiero from Sexy Yama. That stands the test of time. Darude is a stupid song, but for some reason it always worked with Vanderlei. Sandstorm, what are some other really good ones that just sort of like stand out? I love metal, but I don't feel like metal's all that great. The worst is country, like Jimi Hendrix walking out to like whatever it was way down yonder on the Chattahoochee. It's like, I'd rather walk out to the sound of a cat getting run over by a lawnmower or something. What are some other good ones? I like Tony Ferguson's like 1980s beatbox dancer. That's a cool one. What's just the original ones that just have you know what? It was just a one-time thing when James Tahuna walked out in the Men in Black thing. It was so great. It was so great. That's not a great walkout song by itself, but that was a very memorable walkout that I really liked. I think was that before the Nate Marquardt fight, I believe. I can't remember exactly, but that was a great one. It's another good one. I don't know. Oh, Frankie Edgar walking out to kicking the door. That never gets old. BJ Penn from the Brother Ease walkout is always amazing. Those are some really good ones. All right. Bankrupt banking MMA fighters. In 2009, Sports Illustrated put the percentage of former NFL players in bankruptcy at 78%. Good Lord. If fighters were paid like athletes in other major sports, would they suffer similar bankruptcy percentages? I'm sure they would. It's a similar demo, right? Or are there other factors that keep fighters from blowing all their cash? I doubt it. Does Raging Al's real-world real estate experience or Stipe's actual firefighting or Paul Felder's thespian background make for a more financially conscious individual than college to pro ballers? I think for all the stories we've heard about the thespian or firefighting or real estate background, there's probably a lot of NFL players who make similarly, albeit different, prudent, long-term investments. Who was the kid, for example, played for the Ravens? He since quit, who went to MIT to finish his PhD in mathematics. I think 60 Minutes did a big thing on him. He's an interesting guy. There's all kinds of stories like that. But then there's also stories like, Clinton Portis, who blew all his money. But who was it here that had a bunch of restaurants? Not Joe Theismann in the area. It was he was the slot receiver for the Skins for a couple of years. Oh, Pierre Garçon. Pierre Garçon opened up a bunch of like pizza joints in the area, and they're all doing pretty well. So there's a lot of stories like that you don't hear that I don't think are necessarily like this hidden majority. But for all of our Stipe firefighters and Raging Al real estate, I think they have their version of that as well. Plus, they have they have considerably more help. So I'm sure it'd be roughly similar rates, maybe a little bit higher, maybe a little bit lower, but more or less equivalent. It's the same demo. What would the same demo do with the same amount of money? Someone says, I have a hypothesis. NFL players are poor at managing their money because they all get CTE to some degree. Well, that sounds like a really bad hypothesis. I think that MMA differs. Someone else says, I think MMA differs from the NHL, NFL, NBA in that financial success usually doesn't come in your late teens, early 20s. A lot of MMA practitioners have had to support themselves independently for years before their sport begins to become something that they can live off of. This probably conditions you to be more responsible with your money. I don't know that MMA fighters are all that responsible with their money. I don't know where this like feeling is coming from that they're really good about it, because they're not. And so there's this, just to correct the record here, I don't know what the bankruptcy rate is among fighters. You're right, there probably is a degree of self-sufficiency. They also have more modest standards generally, right? Because a lot of them sleep on the mats and clean the mats and sort of live a more Spartan lifestyle earlier on. But I don't know that there's a lot of evidence that they're like particularly good with money. I don't know that to be true at all. In fact, from what I've heard, it's pretty far from that. But something to be said for getting rich at 20 versus getting rich at 30. Fair point. UFC's low ratings. Luke, the UFC Charlotte ratings hit a record low. Now, of course, it was a relatively weak card, but do you think it is more overlaying trend? UFC fatigue, lack of stars, tougher competition, or just a natural cycle of up and downs? Well, what competition was there? There was, what, one basketball game at 8 o'clock? Or, well, I guess I was right. Or maybe it was 9 o'clock? I'm not sure. But there was no football. There was no college football. There was no NFL. There was none of that. I guess there was maybe one basketball game. But that's brought up every time. Oh, there was a basketball game. Oh, the Avengers came out. If your card is solid, people will watch it. It might get affected to some extent, but it would still overall look really good. It would not look record low, and you'd say, well, it'd be 4 million people were it not for, Thor Ragnarok or something. No, your card was not good, and that was the consequential result. So I know people are always like, hey, why are pay-per-view rates low? Buy rates low. People are always like, piracy. And to be clear, piracy is an ever-present concern. But again, if your product is good, the reality is people will pay for it a lot. It probably would be a lot higher without piracy, but blaming piracy for low ratings is always like you're just chasing ghosts. It's not a real thing. So why was it low? Well, there's a couple of theories here. One, the card was not great. Let's just be totally clear about that. It was not well promoted. It looked like there was a decent crowd in Charlotte, to be honest, but there's no surprise about why the card was poor. There was no real hook to it. It was not promoted particularly effectively. There was a card the week before that. There was 2 big cards the week before that. There was a hangover. Who was really interested? So that's that. The question is, and I've seen some people float this, is that the UFC is intentionally tanking on Fox. I don't know that to not be true. I don't quite understand the theory about why you would tank your own ratings at a time when you're looking to use those ratings to curry favor with other potential suitors. Sure, you'd have a larger body of work to look back on and say, this is what we can do when we care, and we don't care, so we want to give them low ratings. But Fox just shelled out $660 million a year for Thursday Night Football. It's a $3 billion deal for 5 years. They're clearly willing to pay for things that they consider to have value. I don't really understand. I mean, I'm not saying it's not true. Maybe there's some aspect to the theory I don't quite get, but I don't understand how tanking your own product in a contract year is sticking it to them. You're sticking it to yourself. It's like a player in a contract year. I'm not gonna rush the passer or try to bat down passes because it'll bring down the, in my case, the skin's overall performance. Yeah, it'll hurt your stock too. So it could be true. It could be true. I just don't quite get it. And I realize that the UFC did some of this stuff with Spike, but in the end, the last season, the Ultimate Fighter did the finale averaged 2.5 million and peaked at 3.4 million. Like whatever like tanking they were doing or not trying they were doing didn't have nearly the same kind of deleterious effect. So this to me feels I don't quite understand, but at the same time, it's also pretty clear that they're not trying as hard. So it's complicated. I don't quite get it, to be quite honest. I don't quite get it. So is it a natural cycle of ups and downs? I don't think it's a natural cycle, but they're not putting their best foot forward on it. Now, whether that means they're outright tanking, I don't quite get that. But why they're not trying as hard? Maybe it's part of a strategy because they know they're good for the money and it doesn't really matter, and they want to save that stuff for pay-per-view. That could be that part. There's just some missing pieces to it, but to be clear, everyone could see it coming, and there's just too much MMA. I don't know how I don't know how anyone could argue otherwise at this point. The amount of appetite that people have for MMA is finite, and it seems to me we are well past what the market will bear. The market, in terms of you and me, we can watch it a lot, but beyond it, seems like the market is, people like, I have people email me after every one of these bad ratings things comes out, and people are always like, I could watch it every night. That's awesome. That's awesome. Oh my God, that's awesome. Right. But the market clearly doesn't agree with you. So that's what we're talking about. UFC 223. Hi, Luke. What do you think about all the big Russian fighters fighting at 223 and the potential matchups for them? Zabit Magomedsharipov versus TBA. Hope it's Miles Jury or Yair. What do you think? Would love that. I still think the Yair fight's the one you should do, but Miles Jury would be a good one too, I guess, if he's ready for it. That being Zabit. Mairbek Taisimov versus Evan Dunham, all but confirmed. Taisimov has been looking for a big opponent. This is his chance. He's not getting any younger. Evan Dunham has had his shot against all the best in the division. He's still a very tough customer. Love that contest. How far could he go? Taisimov? Well, let's see if he can beat the likes of Evan Dunham first. Ferguson versus Habib looks like it'll be happening for the 4th time. Some questions on that. 1, does it happen? Yes. Who do you have winning? Probably Habib. 3, is this the best lightweight fight ever? Ooh. This is the best lightweight fight ever. It's one of them. It might be. That's a good question. It might be. It might be one of the best lightweight. It might be the best lightweight fight ever, at least on paper. I mean, we'll see how it looks in the end, but that's something to consider. Mairbek Visa follow-up. You had Mairbek on your show. I did. Has he already got it for 223? I don't believe so, but I believe it's being processed. Someone says, Luke, I know you liked Max's walkout to Hawaiian kickboxer. I did, yes. That's a very good walkout as well. Max is killing it with that. Machida's swan song. Yeah, man. He's 40 years old, and he's 1-4 in his last 5, admittedly against great opposition. He's fighting an up-and-comer on Saturday, but even if he wins, he is likely done as a title contender. No, he's definitely done as a title contender. Where does he go from here? Gatekeeper to top 10? Or maybe to the fun fights against other semi-legends of the sport? Well, if he gets brutally KO'd, that might be it, to be quite honest. If you get brutally KO'd in your hometown, or not home, well, home country, is he from Belem? He might be. Well, let's see. Salvador Bahia. Well, that's where he was born. And of course, he lives in California. He might be from Belem. I'm not exactly sure what his direct place of origin is, but yeah, if he loses, this might be retirement for him. You know, because I know he came back and was like, I really worked on my wrestling while I was gone. You recall, if people forget this, he had that grappling super fight against Jake Shields. Now, he lost that, but the point being is he was still out there like competing, trying, and Jake Shields is like really, really good at that kind of thing, obviously. So, you know, he thought that this was going to be a time to like refresh and replenish, and it looks like the game has completely passed him by. The question is how long it takes for him to accept that, and B, how long it takes for the UFC to no longer accept that. And that used to be you used to be able to draw like a hard line in the sand. Now you can't, so it's a little bit harder to predict. But for sure, I mean, already the title contention stuff is gone. Now the question is, like, what is he holding on to? If he wins, probably big fights, big main events, so some sort of degree of visibility. If he loses, there's probably some questions about whether he should keep doing this at all. Nate's pay-per-view drawing power. Hi, Luke. How are you? I'm well. Smile. Just how big of a draw can Nate be as a headliner for a pay-per-view? Before the Conor fights, he wasn't exactly a needle mover on pay-per-views. We know he can do up to 1.5 million with Conor. I think it was 1.6 or 7. We know that Conor can easily do $1 million on his own, regardless of the opponent. So if Nate were to fight a Kevin Lee or Eddie Alvarez, how much of a buy rate do you think he would get? Probably high 7s or 8s. There's this idea that, like, you know, he can't sell unless it's Conor. Well, he can't sell like it's Conor unless Conor is there. But in part, Conor can't quite sell unless Nate is there. Now, Conor's baseline is going to be at $1 million and then up. Nate's baseline is not going to be that. It's going to be significantly lower than that. But the point being is both guys' peaks happen when they intersect. So it appears that, Mayweather notwithstanding, at least on the MMA side, that the peak fight for Conor at this point, and maybe this will change down the line, but heretofore has been with Nate. Nate's peak has been with Conor, which is to say they do their best business together. That isn't to say that they have the same baseline, but it's also not to say that it's either 1.6 with Conor or he's back down to 200,000. I don't really buy that at all, just to half it, right? So that would be somewhere around 700,000, right? 200,000 off the 1.6, half, do that in half, 1.4, about 700,000 is probably where I suspect he would be. So maybe even certainly above 5, which would be good. Nate is what we used to have as sort of like your upper middle class pay-per-view buy rate guys. The guys who wouldn't necessarily sell 1 million, but if you're selling 700, 800,000, like a John Jones type when he did against Daniel Cormier, that's great. That's a lot. That's a really, really, really good buy rate. There's nothing to complain about there. There's nothing to be mad at there. That's awesome. It's not the same as what Conor can do, but it's pretty good. It's really good. So probably somewhere around there is what I would expect. Someone says, I'm going to go on a limb and say Nate could do 1 million buys against Lee. The McGregor fights upped his profile times 10, and there'll be a lot of pent-up demand by the time he actually makes the walk. The build-up between Nate and Lee would definitely would move the needle too. I think that's probably on the high end, but maybe. Speaking of the light heavyweight division, what's up with Shogun? Good Lord, I do not know. Shogun is ranked 6th in the UFC and hasn't fought in almost a year. Given the lack of activity plus recent losses of the guys ranked above him, how crazy would it be to see Shogun get another crack at the belt? Virtually impossible to comprehend, but I suppose anything is possible given the state of that division. Champion versus champion bouts. There's been a lot of discussion of late about the announced versus rumored 3 champion versus champion fights supposed to happen at International Fight Week. Personally, I feel conflicted as I freely admit that some of the divisions are barren and there are no real cues there, but some of them are also had chosen challengers. Gus was waiting at light heavyweight. Pennington is supposedly healthy enough to fight, and there's a lot of exciting talents at men's bantamweight. Yeah, tying up bantamweight right now just seems ludicrous. So I just being too negative in the feeling that while there is a lot of benefits here, it does stall out some of the divisions during a time in the company when that doesn't seem that beneficial. And furthermore, it does raise up concerns about what the UFC is going to do for the pay-per-views surrounding that card, considering that they will essentially be taking 6 champions out of circulation. Furthermore, if DC wins and then retires, that would basically set 2 divisions back. Yeah, I mean, there's I talked about this a lot already, and I'm sorry for wiping my nose like a jackass, but I just can't. I can't breathe, and I can't stop it from leaking. So I apologize. I mean, look, as I won't go into super long detail about it, but I think you sort of raised the ultimate concerns. Look, if you want to ask me what the most interesting fight is for DC or Stipe at this point, it's going to be each other. Now, you could maybe argue Gustafson's rematch, given that he's chirping on Twitter and what that could mean. I could entertain that. I don't think it's quite the same situation at heavyweight, at least not right now. We'll see what happens if Cain Velasquez comes back or whatever. But here's basically the major issue is, number one, they're cannibalizing their own roster because they don't have sufficient turnover in their divisions, right? So what naturally has to happen is what used to happen with John Jones when he beat Ryan Bader. You then say, who's going to really ascend through the ranks here and push out all the old guys and then create this, you don't want huge turnover in your division, but you want a healthy amount of turnover so that contenders can keep rising and eventually a champ gets dethroned. And that's what you had at John Jones. People were like, oh, he beat a bunch of old guys. Right. That's exactly what you want. You want him pushing out all those guys and then reestablishing the new, reign at the top. Same with Robert Whittaker. Now, he's been a little bit injured, but the point being, as a young guy pushing out some of the older guys, that's exactly what you want. That's the kind of thing that keeps a division healthy and interesting and novel, keeps it moving. You want divisions to be moving and churning at all times. And what has happened at light heavyweight and heavyweight, at least at the present moment, and some of this is cyclical, but is that the old guys have held on to the division and they've kept new talent largely from being able to push through and create this turnover. And so some of that is just cyclical, which means it's not the UFC's fault, but at the same time, they've got so many events and so many resources, so many events and so many commitments and so many divisions that they clearly can't maintain it. That's why people are like, we should add another 165-pound division. I'm like, you got to be out of your mind. You have to be completely out of your mind. They can't maintain the ones they have, and you want to add another one to the mix? Nico Montano just won at 125 pounds. Where is she? What is she doing? Who's heard anything about her? There was one article I saw that UFC tweeted out about the Cherokee Nation, celebrating her, which is great. But what about, let's get back to action here a little bit or figure out what's happening or something. I realized she had some injuries after the Ultimate Fighter. I'm just pointing out, you've had all these commitments and it's hard to maintain them when that's what's happening. It's hard to maintain. Some of that has to maintain itself, but then the promoter has to take some kind of role after the fact to help these things sort of naturally churn in the way that they're supposed to. And that's what hasn't happened. So my basic point about DC versus Stipe is, look, if you have to make it because that's really the only thing available to you in the interim, and there just really is no great option, especially if Gustafsson is chirping, but he's still injured from his shoulder and he can't come back, well, then you make it. But the two major concerns you have to have is, number one, the fact that they want to do this for 3 different belts, but 6 different divisions, should give everyone absolute night sweats. That is a incredibly bad idea. And if things don't go well, which I don't know if you've ever been watching MMA long enough, the MMA gods are some vengeful effers. Things can turn real bad for those divisions, even worse. And the basic issue is, number one, bantamweight is healthy. You don't need to be sending that guy down to 135. If DJ wants to come up to 135 or 125, if DJ wants to go up to 135, that's fine. But sending TJ down to 125, I realize that's the more interesting fight in certain ways, but God help us what it could do to the rest of that division if that ends up happening. So that's a problem. But the major issue here is what I explained before, which is divisional maintenance, divisional turnover. You've got all these divisions where none of that is happening, at least not very effectively. Some of that is a function of the fact that you maybe don't need some of these divisions, to be quite honest. And the other one is cyclical. And the other part is you've got all these other demands. It's just going to be hard. If the issue is you can't find enough young guys to do this, then again, you're partly at the mercy of who is joining the sport. But the other part is you got to be out there. I mean, I don't know who the scouts are for the UFC and the talent procurement. I don't know what kind of efforts they have. But if I was them right now, I'd be looking around and saying the issue is not let's cannibalize the roster by having division champs fight each other in 6 different belts potentially being tied up. It would be, let's get out there and figure out what's happening in terms of signing the next big thing. Let's get out there and find these guys. And if it means letting some older guys go, then it means letting some older guys go to help create some of this turnover. You think Glover Teixeira, if he goes to Bellator, is going to set their organization on fire? I don't believe that. And I like Glover. I have a lot of respect for his career, but he suppressed the rise. Partly Uzdemir did it too, but he suppressed the rise of Cannonier and he suppressed the rise of Serkinov. Not that great for a division, to be honest. So that kind of a thing you have to really sort of consider. That to me is the issue. It's like, if you want to be in favor of DC versus Stipe, hey man, who's against it? Who is out there saying things like DC versus Stipe would suck? Oh, what a boring fight. I don't want to see that at all. Huh? There's nobody saying that. There's nobody saying that. July 7th is going to be awesome. No one's saying that. The question is not that. The question is, when you look down the line and you ask yourself, what might this do as a consequence? And really, why is this happening? And how do we solve that problem? Because that just solves July 7th, DC Stipe. That just gets you to July 7th. It doesn't do anything else for the problem. People are like, oh, it gives them time to fix it. They've had all this time to fix it. What do you mean gives them time? They got time right now. They don't need to be spotted 6 months to July. They have all the time right now. So I don't understand this argument. Well, it gives them time to fix it. What do you mean gives them time? They've had all this. They've had all this time, and they ended up here. So I understand what your point is. Like, it gives them another 6 months to find somebody, or create interesting matchups, or see who comes back, or see who wins and see who loses. There's a little bit of that, right? But the bigger issue is it's not just those 2 divisions. You got other divisions as well where it's just not enough turnover. And if the guys themselves can't create it, you as a promoter have to help facilitate it. And I don't see a lot of that facilitation happening. Your boy, Erik Anders. Undefeated record, 30 years old, football career before fighting. It sure seems like UFC is getting behind him. Luke, what do you like about what Anders brings to the cage, and what does he need to do to improve to get to the next level? If your boy, which is his nickname, blows through an aging Machida this weekend, do you think it's crazy he could be just a few wins away from a title bout? Again, somebody who needs to push through the ranks. He's sort of got an overall good skill set, big power puncher. I would just say sort of continued refinement, and then a little bit of risk management. He gets a little bit over aggressive in certain scenarios, and I think he has to then fight himself out of the clinch. But he's athletic, powerful, quick, smart. You know, not merely in what he does in terms of the choices he makes. He does get a little bit over aggressive, but generally I think he picks his shots well. And then after the fact, gets on the mic and says, hey, I want to fight someone like Machida, somebody who's aging, somebody he knows. He puts it on him. He probably can put his lights out, even if Machida might be a more technical and obviously more mature striker. He's got a good sense of things. And about, you know, again, this is why I want Darren Till to get a fight, because we're dying to see Darren Till. I'm not knocking Darren Till. I'm saying I want more of that awesome stuff that you're doing. I want to see more of it. All right, let's get out there. Erik Anders, not wasting any time. Let's look at Erik Anders' record, by the way. Just a second here. Let's look at what he's been doing, shall we? Very, very quickly. Let's see. Yes. Erik Anders. So he made his debut against Rafael Natal, knocked him out in July. All right. So then in December, so August, September, October, November, December, that means they announced the fight well within 3 months. He basically had a fight. He defeated Marcus Perez, unanimous decision. Now he beat that boy from pillar to post, but he wins that. So then that was in December. Now in late January, he's got a fight right on top of it. See what I'm talking about? Now he may lose. There may be, you know, you have to pick your spots right, and there's risk involved in all of this. Machida is not to be trifled with, even as he's not the same version as he once was. But you get the idea. He's building and building and building quickly. He's not wasting a lot of time. That's exactly what I think Darren Till needs to be doing. You know, getting the right fight matters, getting the right win matters. I get all that, but at some point you got to strike while the iron is hot. It's still hot. It's still hot, but it won't be hot forever. Let's see. Someone's asking about like prospects outside the UFC's radar. Talk to like Conor Rebush for that, or somebody else who specializes in that. Jack Slack does some of that. I have no time to pay attention to that, unfortunately. MMA-based martial arts. I'd say that all MMA gyms train at least wrestling, BJJ, and Muay Thai as standard. Not exactly. That's changing a little bit. Wrestling, yes. BJJ, yes. And I guess Muay Thai, yes. But I'm seeing a lot of gyms now not training like specifically Muay Thai. In fact, it feels almost a little dated to me. You go to some gyms now and they will just train for like Muay Thai fights, things that don't really have any relationship to MMA. And you're seeing some of the newer ones just do striking, which they're taking some of those elements from Muay Thai, but into a more modern style of striking. So I don't know that that's exactly true. If you're seeing a gym that's still doing like Muay Thai for Muay Thai, there's nothing wrong with that. But there might be a limit as to what they can do in terms of MMA context at a super elite level. Is it too late in the development of a sport for a new staple discipline? For example, could you see judo for MMA or karate for MMA being taught in all gyms decades from now? I wouldn't rule anything out in terms of development, but it does seem like wrestling is sort of foundational. Some kind of submissions are foundational, and then some kind of striking is foundational. I just think narrowing to Muay Thai or narrowing to karate or narrowing to folk or freestyle or the gi jiu-jitsu. The gi has some benefits, as we mentioned before. Joe Lozon has talked about how his omoplata series got better because the gi slowed things down. So he used that as sort of like a training wheels. And then when he took the gi off, he was able to have the omoplata series he had worked on in the gi, then work in no gi. So there still has some benefit there. But what I think is going to happen is these labels about we're going to take these other martial arts and we're going to train specifically for them. Jiu-jitsu might still continue because jiu-jitsu has a much higher average participatory rate. Kids can train it, adults can train it, fat people can train it, skinny people can train it, tall, short, strong, not strong. It's not a spectator sport, although people are trying to change that, but it is definitely a participatory sport. And so I still think that will continue. But and Muay Thai to some extent too, but it's a little bit harder to come by, especially as I think people get more and more sensitive to brain injury. And then wrestling for MMA, and that means, you know, MMA specific scenarios and things like that. And of course, there's always going to be, you know, wrestling in high schools and wrestling in college. So we'll still be drawing from that. But I think gyms are going to take those core martial arts, such as they are, and then slowly adapt them for highly specific MMA purposes. And I think that you're seeing that already with striking. A lot of gyms don't call it Muay Thai anymore because it isn't. They're just doing striking for MMA. Big John McCarthy, 2 Bellator shows down. How do you rate his work so far? What would you like to have change or improve on? Someone says below this person writes, personally, I find it very off-putting having John interviewing fighters after fights. It seems somehow beneath him. I I don't know. I'm not sure I'm liking it too much, to be honest. He clearly is knowledgeable, and he clearly is a great guy. And I also feel like you have to give him time to grow into the role. It could take time. You know, some people like Paul Felder, they get shot out of a cannon, and from the word go, they're amazing. And you're like, well, that's what it should sound like every time. No, not necessarily. Some guys take a little bit longer to figure it out. They're not as good right away. It's hard, man. It's a hard job. It's not easy. So, you know, I think he's owed some time to see how things go. My major complaint is, you guys know I don't feel like Goldberg is particularly good at this job. And I don't know that Big John and him work well together. I think Big John might work better with Morrow, because Big John has this sort of like fatherly tone, and Morrow is like really caffeinated, and it works well as a contrast of styles. I guess we'll have to see when they do it together. The other part is and I don't mean to sound ageist, but the broadcast sounds a little old. There's not that Jimmy Smith was some, like, you know, millennial doing the Tide Pod challenge in between fights or anything, but he had a certain youthful enthusiasm, and the broadcast just kind of got a little bit older, quite literally. Between, you know, before it was Sean Grande and Jimmy Smith, before that Sean Wheelock and Jimmy Smith, it just had a little bit of youthful energy, and I don't feel like you have that now. The other part is, like, look, man, I'm not an expert. I've said this a million times. I know a fair amount because I've been in gyms for a decade, and I've been talking to fighters for a decade. I've been very lucky to learn and read and watch, and to the extent that I could, participate, right? So I've accumulated some wisdom, but I'm not an expert. But I don't hear a lot of things that are said on that Bellator broadcast that don't immediately occur to me. That's not the case when Paul Felder commentates. That's not the case when Brian Stan commentates. And it's definitely not the case when Dominic Cruz commentates. I have to take notes when those guys talk, because they're telling me things I don't know. For now, it just feels like they're not saying anything I don't already see. And for me, for somebody who's not an expert to be saying that, you know, I wonder if the level of technical specificity is high enough. Now, you can make a case that maybe it's too high with somebody like Dominic Cruz, or it's too high with Paul Felder. They're getting too in the weeds on underhooks and fakes and feints and all that kind of stuff. Maybe that's true, but I'm not an expert, and I can see all the stuff they're seeing because they're saying, and there's nothing new coming out. So again, let's give him time. It takes time to settle in. It takes time to get good at this kind of thing. You know, he's went right from refereeing to commentating. It's not like he's been doing it all this time. Let's see how it goes. Let's see if he gets a better pair with Morrow or not. But so far, you know, it's not been my favorite. What are your picks for the 3 super fights if they do them? Ooh. So I'm going to pick DC over Stipe. I would probably pick DJ over TJ because I just never seen TJ at 125. I don't know how he would look. And I'd probably pick Cyborg over Amanda Nunes. Probably. So my one upset there would be DC over Stipe. But I realize that's very, very debatable. I'm not telling you. I know for a fact that Daniel Cormier is going to be your new heavyweight champion. I don't know that. But if you're asking me to pick, that's the direction that I would probably go. Coffee. Let's see here. Someone says, oh, yeah. Now, if DJ fought TJ at 135, I would pick TJ. And maybe TJ beats him at 125. It's just, having never seen him there, it's like, how confident can you really be about it? That's all. Luke, are you aware of the Twitter account MMA Supremacy? I am. He always posts something that makes MMA look bad, then writes 100% MMA. MMA Supremacy. Let me tell you a story about MMA Supremacy. I don't know who runs it. But back in the day when the UFC and Strikeforce were battling, MMA Supremacy was like a super pro Strikeforce account. Super pro. Like, look how good their ratings are. Look how good this is. Look how good this is. Any kind of bad news about UFC, they would do it. And I don't care. You know, tweet whatever you want to tweet about. Like, it doesn't change whatever is going on in the wider world, I suppose. But in any case, but as slowly as like Strikeforce got bought out and as the UFC sort of took over the industry, at least at the elite level, the tweets became much less about like pro Strikeforce stuff and then just became about like how bad MMA was. So just as a bit of clarification, it wasn't always this. It used to be a little bit different, and it's changed over time. Ronda's breakdown on ESPN. Did you all see this? I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. Hi, Luke. Did you see Ronda's mental breakdown when asked about her losses to Holly and Amanda on ESPN? That was something. What do you make of her reaction? And what does it say about her mental stability going into the WWE? The WWE crowd can be a rough bunch. I can see the Holly Holm chants coming a mile away, and I'm honestly a little worried how Rousey will handle that. That ESPN interview was hard to watch. Wow. First of all, is there going to be a time when Ronda Rousey speaks to somebody not named Ramona Shelburne? Just a question I have. I don't know what the answer to that is, but I would sure love to know if somebody knows, because I find that weird. But okay. That aside, I found it incredible. I found it incredible. Look, man, I don't know what it's like to have been a celebrity like that. I don't get it. And I don't know what it's like to have suffered defeats like that in such a publicly humiliating way. I don't. I can imagine it would be incredibly devastating. I can also imagine that as somebody who began to enjoy the benefits of celebrity and they thought they liked it, and then once they encountered the downside of it, they decided they didn't like it as much. At least not in the same way. They wanted to package it in their life differently. I can appreciate that fact. You know, how do you know if you like celebrity if you haven't tasted the bad side of it yet? Because she was just getting more and more and more popular. And I'm sure that came with certain stresses or certain challenges, but she seemed to really embrace it and like it and be and have it be a big part of her life. And I don't judge her for that at all. Not one bit. And then when the bad things happened, she decided this kind of celebrity isn't good for my mental health. I can really appreciate that fact. But here's my question. You know, all these fighters, you talk to them, they all sound the same in certain ways. They all say, I'm going to be the best. I'm going to be champion of the world. I'm going to be X. I'm going to be Y. Like they have this, fervent mental belief, because you have to, right? If you want to achieve at that level. And then most of them don't reach that. And then you see them begin to sort of reconcile with that. Like, what does that mean? And the healthy ones sort of figure out that doesn't mean that I want to be done competing. That doesn't mean I don't enjoy this process. That doesn't mean I still can't be more tomorrow than I am today. And other ones, collapse. But here's my thing. I've never encountered a fighter ever like that. Ever. And I've met them at every level, man. From the McGregors all the way down to some amateur. And Rousey's a bit of a unique case, I grant. But at some level, they all have a common experience together. I have never seen anything like that in my life. I've never... What did she think of herself in order for that kind of collapse to render her this emotionally crippled? Right? Because we mentioned the other fighters all said to themselves, I'm the best. And then some of them are, but most of them aren't. Very few ever really prove that. The 99% are never come close. And you don't see that from the 99%. So how did this happen? What was she telling herself internally? That when the storm clouds came, she couldn't walk in the rain, man. I've never seen anything like that. She must have told herself either that she was, borderline invincible, or that she told herself the same things that other fighters told themselves, but that other fighters are able to collect themselves and collect the kind of psychological and emotional resources necessary to deal with, embarrassment or trauma or difficulty or stress or loss. Look, man, I don't know. I primarily believe that life is about suffering. The paradox of life is that the way to mitigate suffering is to sort of ignore it and try to be a better version of yourself tomorrow than you were today. And the ones who do that typically find the most happiness and typically find the best success. It's really kind of the paradox, but life is inherently difficult. It is inherently unfair. It will mistreat you. It will not do the things for you that you want. You will not see yourself. Very likely you will not be what your dreams ask you to be. These are all realities. How many people really end up being what they see in their head as their dreams? Almost none of us, right? Very, very, very few. But if you just capitulate to that, it becomes this incredibly depressing affair day over day. Vice versa, if you just strive towards incremental progress and you don't succumb to the weight of this fallen world, you actually find a measure of peace and happiness in it. She has none of the latter, apparently. None. Now, she does appear to have a better sense of what's healthy for her in being emotionally grounded, saying, I could make more money doing other things, but, I want to do things that make me happy. I think that's good. And I can't wish her happiness enough. Everybody in this life deserves to find happiness the way that they can, right? Everybody. Maybe not the Unabomber, but, Supermax notwithstanding, the rest of us deserve a chance at finding some happiness in the world. And that's the way she's going to find it. You would be a horrible monster to try and take that away from her. But it, to me, is a major, major, major red flag that these many months after all that has happened, years in certain cases, almost anyway, that she has no internal resources to deal with that kind of difficulty. That is such a red flag. And I don't know anything about WWE. I didn't even think of the fact that if they turn on her, they might start chanting Holly home, Holly home. You can't run from those problems, right? You can change judo to MMA to WWE. You can change locations, but those problems, if they exist, they will follow you. If you are afraid of something, you can move to a new town. You can change your name. You can get a new haircut. You can get a new career. It will follow you because those problems manifest themselves whether you want them to or not. And you just have to have the internal resources to stand up to it. And where you derive those from and how you can produce them if they don't naturally occur to you, I leave that to experts in the field of, psychiatric help, or whoever, a life coach, whoever can help deliver these kinds of things to you. But you need them. You need them. It's part of me feels like she's right in saying, I'm going to go to WWE and I'm going to be, this is a healthier thing for me. And I believe that. And again, I cannot be clear about this. I hope she finds it, man. I really do. Because, you're lucky in this world if you get to find something that makes you happy. Happiness is partly an illusion. And if you can go and find it, oh my God, like this is great. But you cannot outrun your weaknesses. All you can do is marshal the resources to not succumb to them. And I don't feel like she's done the second part of that process at all. She has removed herself from what I think she saw as a toxic situation. She hasn't dealt with the challenges that are going to come with there's a downside to everything. And when that downside hits, is she going to be ready for that? I don't know. All right. Someone says, come on, Luke, let's go. 10 minutes with this. I'll go another 15 if I feel like it. It's 2:15. Let's go to the Twitter machine. All right. Let's see. I noticed you became aware of Jordan Peterson. Yeah, I saw his interview he did with, what was it, Kathy Newman or something. A lot of the things he talks about in his lectures and his book are finding your own purposes and happiness while coming to terms with accepting the inherent hardship of life. Oh, very good. There you go. Then in that case, we probably agree. If you had an interview with the wrong, Dave Meltzer like they did on MMA Tonight yesterday, once you realized it wasn't him, would you continue with the interview like normal or stop and say something? I would have stopped it. There's this dude named Josh who works on the show after mine, and they had Dave Meltzer on the show after mine. It was some dude named David Meltzer who had nothing to do with MMA or pro wrestling or anything. And the donk who works on that show booked the wrong guy because I've never seen a donk bigger in my life. Okay. Let's see. What does it mean to pop over to another weight division and snag a belt with no intention of defending it? The obvious answer is that they beat the best guy, but were fighters like Bisping and Alvarez really the best? Well, Bisping didn't snag from a different division. That was the division he was in. And Alvarez too. I guess you mean because St. Pierre beat him and then of course Conor beat him. Well, Conor remains to be seen because it appears he'll return to the weight class. But was he the best ever? No, he was just the best on that night. Now he held the belt for a while because when you have it, That sort of signifies you as you walk around at all times as the best guy. But really, that's not what it means. It just means you were the best on that night. It just confers upon you, additional benefits. It doesn't actually change in the real world what happened. In the real world, you won one fight. Now, in that case, 199, a crazy important fight, but just one night. Let's see. Are you aware of Master Ken Enter the Dojo show on YouTube? He does a lot of martial arts-based satire. Highly recommend it. I've seen it. Some of it is very funny. Have you watched the latest Arsenal Fan TV video? It's pure hilarity. Why? Because they lost 3-1 to Swansea. But they're all pumped up now because of the signing of Aubameyang. Does Valentina get a title shot with a win? Which scenarios for DC Stipe is more likely? Does Valentina get a title shot off of a win? Probably. Which scenarios for DC Stipe is more often? DC gets the finish, faces Jones at MSG. DC gets the decision, rematch at MSG. Stipe gets the finish, faces Kane, JBJ. Stipe wins decision, faces JBJ, Kane. I'm going to say DC gets the finish, faces John Jones at MSG. Oh, snap. How does YouTube Red affect money earned on YouTube for you through ads? You get a portion of their subscription fee. There's no ads on YouTube Red, but you have to pay for YouTube Red. They take a portion of that, and then when your breakdown happens each month, you get ads based on click-throughs, how many watched, how many skipped. Here, let me pull it up here real quickly if I can, just for a second. But you do get, I'm not going to waste time, but you get when your ad money comes in, a function of it partly is YouTube Red, just sort of like a leftover. Luke, are you a work-in guy at the gym? Never. I never asked to work in, ever. Is the Reebok deal contributing to the ratings decline? The UFC feels very sanitary now. I do not think so. Other than to say it's created malaise among fighters, and that malaise has deterred them from, taking as many fights as possible, I suppose. But that seems like a bit of a stretch. Do you think the absurdity of the UFC and McGregor situation is actually scripted? No, because I live in the real world. Is Bruce Buffer overexposed? No. Have you heard Kevin Lee on the Big Brown Breakdown? Guys, I do nothing but work all day long. I do not have time for MMA podcasts. I love Brendan Schaub. I will try to make time for it when I can, but no. It aches me that we never got to see Khabib versus Cerrone at 187. Considering the trajectories of their career, would you still be interested in that fight to take place? Not right now. Do you agree with Eddie Alvarez's theory that the UFC's lightweight belt conundrum? He believes the UFC will wait for Tony Khabib to make weight, then strip Conor that day. If you strip Conor now and the title fight falls through again, you have no champion. Seems like a reasonable theory. But I just love people being like, oh, it's so simple. If it's so simple, then what's the answer? And then they read off to you some assumption, some speculation that they're making. Your speculation sounds reasonable. Your assumption sounds fine, but everyone's got a slightly different assumption. Hence, it's not simple. You know what's simple? Here's a press release, as they did or an announcement. Conor McGregor is stripped. That's simple. Your speculation, your assumption about what you think is going to happen, even if it's a well-intentioned, reasonable assumption, there's nothing about that that's simple. Based on your interactions, which MMA fighters are surprisingly the funniest off camera than they portray on camera? I don't know. I don't really sort of joke it up with them too much. Would Derek Lewis be a fan of the music you play in the car? Yes, because I do Hip Hop Wednesdays. Excuse me, I do Heavy Metal Wednesdays and then Hip Hop Fridays. So I would imagine. If Johnny Bones returns to fight DC, how do you think the fans will react considering the change of perception of both fighters? I think they'll go right back to loving John Jones as they did before. All that talk about how he was, the worst thing in the world, how he was a terrible person, blah, blah, blah. He hit a pregnant lady. He ran. You name it. All the terrible things that he did, all the terrible things people think he did, all of that collapsed around 214. It just went right away. People want to see him fight. And they can lie to themselves and say, oh, I don't care if he ever comes back. Stop lying. Stop lying. Stop lying. Yes, you do. And every time I say this, there's always one or two people that write me, I don't care if he ever comes back. Yeah, I'm sure you don't. Once again, the market will speak differently. Everybody cares. Everybody wants to see him back. This notion that everybody wants to see him banned 4 years. They might want to play with the headlines and the salaciousness of it and the scandal of it for a while. But in your heart of hearts, what you really want is you want to see him back, and you want to see him fight Daniel Cormier or Stipe or Kane or whoever. That's really the reality of it. So all this talk about, oh my God, he got caught by USADA again, you watch. You watch if he gets a year suspension and he comes back, everybody and their brother is going to be like, here comes the GOAT. He's back, because it's just this. It's just this. What's your opinion on the UFC failing to promote once again a story about Rocky and Tisha Torres, both on the cusp of title shots pretty much at the same time as the married lesbians, or is it no different than Nunes and Nina's situation? To me, I don't know how receptive the audience outside of MMA would, or inside of MMA would be to that, number one, quite frankly. And number two, I think they have a hard time promoting their fighters because there's so much going on. They can't really drill down and do it. People keep tagging me in this Derek Lewis thing. I tweeted about it an hour ago, but I admit it's hilarious. If you haven't seen it, Derek Lewis is in a car with one of his white friends who's blasting like this incredibly offensive metal. Not like offensive, like racially offensive, just, you know, it's blaring. And you see him in there going, no, help me. It's great. Let's see. Ooh, who is your favorite non-MMA fighting SB Nation employee that you've met? Matt Ufford seems like a cool dude. Matt Ufford and I talk all the time because Matt Ufford, I see him in New York when I go up on Thursdays for the beat. And he is a former Marine like me. So that's always fun. Spencer Hall is a good dude. Who else is a good dude or lady that I know from SB Nation? Man, there's been a lot of turnover, so some of the ones I like have since left. But yeah, those two would be great. Spencer Hall and Matt Ufford, two guys you can't go wrong with. There's a bunch of other ones. Mike Prada is a good one. Yeah. Travis, I forget his last name, the guy who does I think he's the NHL editor. He's cool too. Let's see. For what it's worth, Barclays is advertising 223's main event as the undisputed lightweight championship. Yeah, that's interesting. But again, I'm going to say it one more time. It's only simple when they say Conor McGregor's been stripped. That's simple. That's a fact. That's a fact that carries weight and significance. But saying we haven't stripped him, because they have not said that, and then saying we have undisputed title, there's nothing. One necessitates the other. Nothing simple about it. Nothing. Let's see. Silva Belfort and UFC 134 explodes the market in Brazil to the UFC in 2011. What do you think about the Brazilian MMA market nowadays with the Brazilian legends getting old with not much young talent emerging? It's the same thing that's happening in these divisions. I had a talk with a Brazilian MMA fan. They were saying, like, look at the old legends that, like, you know, even before the Machidas and the Silvas, there were the, you know, Walid Ismails and, you know, the guys who helped to start, you know, Mario Sperry's, and right, there was all these guys that came before them, and then there was this boom where it was the Nogueira brothers and the Hua brothers, and it was Vanderlei Silva and the Shoot Box guys and Arona, and you could just go on and on and on and on. I mean, it was this huge crop of talent that just exploded onto the scene. Borrachinha appears like he can be one of the guys who can take over next. And, you know, I guess we'll see. But again, it's that replenishment that has to happen. And of course, Jose Aldo was a big part of the original crop as well. But that crop is fading, and the new crop, partly the biggest problem was that there weren't a lot of countries doing MMA. So it was like UFC, it was, US, Brazil, and Japan were really the only countries that were doing it. Canada too, to an extent, but those are the big three. And now the sport is way more globalized. So you don't get quite as much of that. It's hard to concentrate power in one country. The USA is probably still the most powerful one, but even then, you know, you can just get good fighters just about anywhere these days, right? So that's one of the big issues that I think Brazil's facing. Continue this, shall we? I'm new to MMA. Have they always had 12 pay-per-views a year? That seems like too much. the cards are watered down. Well, there was for a while there where there was like, 5 a year, and then 8 a year, and then 11 a year, and then 13 a year. I think it was one year there was like 14. So down to 12, one a month has been sort of the standard for a while now. But in my judgment, yeah, it's probably too much. I really want to know what it's going to take for them to invest in Fight Pass. Am I the only one that wants to see Fight Pass become something more than what it is? Am I the only one? Maybe I am. Maybe there's not. Maybe there's. It could very well be that there's just not much appetite for Fight Pass to be something, relatively equivalent to what the WWE Network is. That could very well be the case. But I just feel like, my God, if you look, how many MMA fans are there in the United States? I don't know. And you saw that release from the PFL made no sense. Like, oh, we're going to have access to 300 million fans, 300 million MMA fans worldwide. Hold on. Okay, so Facebook says they had 2 billion monthly active users. So if they have 300 million MMA fans, that means 15% of all make sure my math on this is right. Hang on just a second here. 15% of all Facebook users are MMA fans? That doesn't sound correct at all. Let's see. Times 20, 200, 2,000, 20,000, 200,000, 2 million. Yeah, no. I don't think 15% of all global Facebook users are MMA fans. But the point being is, however many there are in North America, add that up, South America, add that up to Africa, to Asia, to Europe. Collectively as a group, it's a sizable group. And to the extent you can, collect the audience on a unifying platform, it just feels to me, I realize getting from here to there must be insanely difficult. But at the same time, my God, what a way to marshal your global audience. And I think really, to some extent, if you could get them all, liberate you from some of the constraints of linear TV and some of the limitations that medium sort of handicaps you with. But I don't know. They don't seem all that interested in it. It would also be amazing if they got on, and I realize I doubt Netflix has any interest in live sports, but getting on Netflix, I think, would be huge. But, who knows what's going to happen. Let's see. Do you think the quick turnaround on UFC events might help them avoid controversies, i.e. Uriah Hall weight cut main event fallouts? Well, it's a double-edged sword, right? So the answer is probably yes. When something bad like that happens, they can kind of move on from it relatively quickly. On the other side, the other problem is that when something good happens, it can also be hard to capitalize on it. So it comes with its benefits, but it comes with its drawbacks too. And I think, at least at this stage in the organization's development, some ability to slow things down and really focus on them, curate them, develop them, push them to the maximum potential would be a little bit better. But if you've got a responsibility here and a responsibility there and a responsibility here and a responsibility there, it can just be, you're spreading yourself so thin, it can be hard to really make sure you have consistent quality all the way across. You can grow at scale and the audiences will be responsive to that for a while, but eventually the noticeable drop off in quality has a negative effect. All right, so we have to get out of here. I appreciate you all watching. As I use my touchpad here, which I don't like. Subscribe to the channel below if you don't mind. Give it a like. I think there's going to be an MMA beat tomorrow. We've got Guilherme Cruz in Brazil. He's covering UFC Belem, so there'll be lots of coverage around that. Be on the lookout for it. I have to go. If you got any email, shoot me one at lukethomasnews@gmail.com. And until next time, stay frosty.